the first time Katherine Edwards entered the small church in Jackson, Wyoming. In the summer of 1876, the whispers began before she even found a seat. She clutched her worn prayer book to her chest, feeling the tight pinch of her Sunday dress as she moved down the aisle, her breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the steep walk from her modest home on the edge of town. Katherine had arrived in Jackson just 3 weeks prior, her life's possessions packed into 2 trunks after her father's passing left her with nothing but debts and painful memories in Chicago. At 26, unmarried and weighing nearly twice what society deemed acceptable for a woman of her height, Katherine had become accustomed to the sidelong glances and barely concealed disdain. But something about this moment standing alone in a church filled with strangers made the familiar pain cut deeper. "Lord have mercy, she'll break the pew," someone whispered loudly enough for the sound to carry. Muffled laughter followed, and Katherine felt heat rush to her cheeks. She stood frozen, searching desperately for an empty space where she might hide herself away. The church was nearly full, families and couples pressed together on wooden pews worn smooth from years of Sunday services. Only empty spaces remained at the ends of rows where she would be exposed on display. "Madam!" A deep voice cut through her panic. Katherine turned to find herself looking up into the face of a tall man with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. "There's room right here if you'd like to sit." The stranger wore a simple black vest over a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal tanned forearms. His dark hat was clutched respectfully in calloused hands, and a shock of sandy brown hair fell across his forehead. Before she could respond, more whispers rose behind her. "Mitchell's sitting with the fat one. Poor man probably feels sorry for her." Katherine's eyes filled with tears, but the stranger Mitchell seemed not to hear. Instead, he gestured again to the space beside him, and when she hesitated, extended his hand. "Please," he said simply. Katherine moved woodenly forward, acutely aware of every eye in the congregation following her progress. When she reached the pew, Mitchell stepped back to let her enter first, positioning himself between her and the aisle, creating a barrier between Katherine and the curious, judgmental stares. As Reverend Paulson began the service, Katherine sat rigidly, hands clasped around her prayer book, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She had hoped for a fresh start in Jackson, had prayed that this frontier town might be different from the cruel society she'd left behind. "You're new to Jackson," Mitchell whispered, his voice barely audible over the Reverend's opening prayer. Katherine nodded stiffly, not trusting her voice. The congregation rose for a hymn, and Katherine fumbled with her book, nearly dropping it. As she bent to retrieve it, she heard a fresh round of snickers from the row behind. Her fingers trembled so badly that she could barely hold the pages. Without a word, Mitchell shifted his own hymnal slightly, angling it so she could see. And then, to her complete shock, he reached down and took her hand in his. His grip was warm and steady, and Katherine found herself clinging to it like a lifeline as the congregation sang around them. She tried to pull away when the hymn ended, but Mitchell kept her hand firmly in his as they sat. Through the sermon, through the prayers, through the final benediction, he held her hand, his thumb occasionally brushing across her knuckles in a gesture so gentle it nearly undid her completely. When the service ended, Mitchell finally released her, but only to gather his hat and stand. "Mitchell Thorne," he said, offering a small bow. "Ranch foreman at the Rocking S just outside of town." "Katherine Edwards," she replied softly, her voice barely audible over the chatter of the departing congregation. "Miss Edwards," he said, and there was something in the way he said her name, something respectful, something kind that made her look up and truly see him for the first time. He was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines around his eyes and a strong jawline softened by the hint of a smile. "May I see you to your door?" Katherine blinked in surprise. I couldn't impose." "No imposition," Mitchell replied. "Sunday's my only day in town most weeks. I'd be honored for the company." As they stepped out of the church into the bright Wyoming sunshine, Katherine was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments. She kept her eyes fixed on the dusty street ahead, wishing she could disappear. Mitchell, however, walked tall beside her, his stride unhurried, his hat tipped back to reveal his face. "Beautiful day," he commented, as if they were simply two friends enjoying a Sunday stroll. "Jackson's at its finest in summer, wouldn't you agree?" "I've only been here 3 weeks," Katherine admitted. "I arrived from Chicago at the end of June." "Chicago?" Mitchell let out a low whistle. "That's quite a journey for a lady on her own." Katherine's spine stiffened. "I manage well enough on my own, Mr. Thorne." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I don't doubt that for a moment, Miss Edwards. Still, it takes courage to leave everything familiar behind." They walked in silence for a moment before Katherine asked, "Have you been in Jackson long?" 5 years this October," Mitchell replied. "Came west from Missouri after the war, needed open skies and room to breathe." "And did you find it? Room to breathe?" Mitchell looked at her thoughtfully. "Most days, some ghosts follow a man no matter how far he rides." They reached the small boarding house where Katherine had taken a room. She paused at the steps, uncertain of the proper way to end their encounter. "Thank you for your kindness today, Mr. Thorne." "Mitchell," he corrected gently, "and there's no need for thanks." "There is," Katherine insisted, finally meeting his gaze directly. "Most people—" She faltered, unable to finish. "Most people miss out on knowing good folks because they can't see past their own foolishness," Mitchell said, his voice hardening slightly. Then, his expression softening, he added, "Will you be at service next Sunday?" The question caught her by surprise. Yes, I expect so." Mitchell nodded, seeming pleased. "Then I'll see you then, Miss Edwards." He tipped his hat and turned to go, then paused and looked back. "If you don't mind my asking what brings a Chicago lady to Jackson," Katherine hesitated, then decided on the truth. "My father died. There was nothing left for me there but debts and memories." Mitchell's expression grew solemn. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I answered an advertisement," she continued. "The school needs a teacher starting in September." His face brightened. "You're to be our new school teacher." Katherine nodded, a small smile touching her lips despite herself. "If the town council approves my application next week." "They'd be fools not to," Mitchell said with such conviction that Katherine felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Until Sunday then, Miss Edwards." "Until Sunday, Mr. Thorne." Katherine watched him walk away, his tall figure moving easily through the Sunday crowds. Only when he turned the corner and disappeared from sight did she climb the steps to her room, her mind replaying every moment of their encounter, especially the feel of his hand holding hers through the long service. For the first time since arriving in Jackson, Katherine felt something other than loneliness. It was small, fragile as a wildflower, but it was there nonetheless hope. Throughout the week, Katherine threw herself into preparations for her interview with the town council. She reviewed her teaching certificates, planned sample lessons, and carefully mended her best dress for the occasion. Yet through it all, her thoughts repeatedly drifted to Sunday and whether Mitchell Thorne would truly seek her out again. When Sunday arrived, Katherine dressed with more care than usual, pinning her thick brown hair into a neat bun and selecting her blue dress, which, while still tight, was the most flattering of her limited wardrobe. She arrived at church early, hoping to slip into a pew before the congregation filled the small building. The church was nearly empty when she entered, with only Reverend Paulson arranging his papers at the pulpit and the elderly church caretaker lighting candles. Katherine selected a pew near the back and settled in, opening her prayer book and pretending to read while her eyes continuously darted to the door. The minutes passed. The church slowly filled. Families arrived, then couples, then the town's single men, freshly shaved and uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Katherine kept her gaze fixed on her book, even as her hope began to fade. Just as Reverend Paulson was about to begin the service, the door opened one final time. Katherine didn't need to look up to know it was Mitchell. She felt his presence even before he slid into the pew beside her. "Good morning, Miss Edwards," he whispered, slightly out of breath. "Apologies for cutting it so close. One of the mares decided this morning would be perfect for foaling." The relief that flooded through her was so intense it was almost painful. "No apology needed, Mr. Thorne." Throughout the service, Mitchell sat close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. When the first hymn was announced, he reached for her hand without hesitation, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His palm was warm against hers, and Katherine felt the stares of the congregation burning into her back, but she couldn't bring herself to care. After the service, Mitchell escorted her from the church again, this time steering her toward the small cafe on the main street. "Have you had breakfast, Miss Edwards? Mrs. Wilson makes biscuits on Sundays that would make angels weep." Katherine hesitated. "I'm not certain that would be appropriate, Mr. Thorne." Mitchell's expression grew serious. "If you're concerned about propriety, we can certainly sit by the window in full view of half the town, but if you're worried about what people might say—" He trailed off, his gaze searching her face. "I'm accustomed to what people say," Katherine replied, lifting her chin slightly. Something flashed in Mitchell's eyes, anger perhaps, but not directed at her. "Then let them talk while we enjoy Mrs. Wilson's biscuits." The cafe was crowded with the after-church rush, but Mitchell secured them a small table by the front window. As they waited for their food, Katherine found herself studying him openly for the first time. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't simply blue but had flecks of gray near the pupils. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, and his hands, though clean, bore the calluses and small scars of hard physical labor. "You're staring, Miss Edwards," Mitchell said, his mouth quirking up at one corner. Katherine blushed furiously. "I apologize. No need. I'm staring right back," he admitted, his expression open and honest. "I find myself curious about the lady from Chicago who's brave enough to start fresh in Wyoming territory." Over plates of biscuits with honey and strong coffee, Katherine shared bits of her story: her father's business failures, her years teaching at a girls' school in Chicago, her decision to answer the advertisement for a frontier teacher. Mitchell listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering small details of his own life in return: his childhood in Missouri, his service during the war, though he spoke little of the fighting, his journey west and eventual settlement in Jackson. "The ranch owner, Mr. Sullivan, is getting on in years," Mitchell explained. "Has no children of his own, treats me more like a son than a foreman these days." "It sounds like you've found a home here," Katherine observed. Mitchell nodded. "I have, though I admit it's been lonely at times." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps you'll find a home here too, Miss Edwards." The possibility hung between them, delicate as a soap bubble. Before Katherine could respond, Mrs. Wilson appeared with fresh coffee, giving her a moment to compose herself. "Your interview with the council is tomorrow?" Mitchell asked as Mrs. Wilson moved away. Katherine nodded, anxiety suddenly tightening her throat. "At 10 o'clock. They'd be fools to choose anyone else, Mitchell said firmly. But if you'd like, I could meet you afterward, hear how it went. The offer was so unexpected, so kind, that Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. I would like that very much. They parted outside the cafe, Mitchell tipping his hat with a promise to meet her the following day at noon by the town square. Katherine watched him go, then made her way back to the boarding house, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She wasn't naive. She understood that Mitchell's attention was unusual. Men like him, handsome and respected, didn't typically seek the company of women like her. Yet there had been nothing in his manner that suggested pity or mockery. He spoke to her as if she were any other lady, his eyes meeting hers without discomfort or disguise. The next morning, Katherine dressed in her best clothes, a dark green skirt and jacket that she had altered herself to accommodate her figure. She pinned her hair severely back and gathered her teaching certificates and reference letters into a leather portfolio that had once belonged to her father. The town council, consisting of 5 men including Mayor Harrison and Reverend Paulson, received her in the small room above the general store that served as the town hall. They were polite but reserved as Katherine presented her qualifications and answered their questions about her teaching philosophy and experience. "Miss Edwards," Mayor Harrison said finally, "Jackson may not be Chicago, but we take education seriously. Our children deserve the best teacher we can provide." "I understand completely," Katherine replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I believe I am that teacher, sir." The mayor exchanged glances with the other council members. "We've had 3 other applicants. We'll need time to deliberate." "Of course," Katherine nodded, gathering her papers with hands that trembled slightly. "When might I expect your decision?" "By week's end," Reverend Paulson answered kindly. Katherine left the town hall, her stomach tight with anxiety. It was only 11:15, too early to meet Mitchell, so she walked slowly around the square, trying to calm her nerves. Jackson was small but growing, with wooden boardwalks lining the main streets and a mix of businesses catering to both town residents and the surrounding ranches and farms. She paused outside the schoolhouse, a simple one-room building with a bell tower and freshly painted white clapboards. Through the windows, she could see rows of desks and a blackboard spanning the front wall. Katherine imagined herself standing before a class there, sharing her love of literature and mathematics, helping to shape young minds far from the constraints of Chicago society. "It suits you," a voice said behind her, and Katherine turned to find Mitchell approaching, earlier than expected. "Standing there, looking like you already belong." Katherine smiled despite her nervousness. "I hope the council agrees." "How did it go?" Mitchell asked, falling into step beside her as they continued around the square. "They were fair in their questions," Katherine replied carefully. "They'll decide by the end of the week." Mitchell nodded. "Mayor Harrison likes to seem deliberate, but he's a good judge of character." He hesitated, then added, "I may have put in a good word with Reverend Paulson yesterday." Katherine stopped walking, genuinely surprised. "You spoke to the Reverend about me." "I mentioned that Jackson would be fortunate to have a teacher of your caliber," Mitchell said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I hope I didn't overstep." "No," Katherine said softly. "That was very kind of you." They continued their walk, eventually stopping at the town's small park where a few benches sat beneath cottonwood trees. As they settled onto one, Katherine found herself studying the town with fresh eyes, trying to imagine it as home. "What will you do if they don't offer you the position?" Mitchell asked, his voice gentle. Katherine had been asking herself the same question. "Continue east, I suppose. There are other frontier towns in need of teachers." Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "I hope it doesn't come to that," he finally said. Jackson would be poorer without you, Miss Edwards." The simple sincerity in his voice took her breath away. "You hardly know me, Mr. Thorne." "I know enough," he replied, his gaze steady on hers. For the next 4 days, Katherine waited anxiously for the council's decision. Each day, Mitchell found a reason to be in town, supplies needed for the ranch, a meeting with the blacksmith, a telegram to send to Cheyenne. Each encounter seemed accidental, but ended with them sharing coffee or a walk through town, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each meeting. Katherine learned about Mitchell's 3 years fighting for the Union, his nightmares that still woke him some nights, and his dream of someday having his own ranch. In turn, she shared stories of her mother's death when she was 12, her father's subsequent decline into gambling and drink, and her own struggles to maintain her position at the girls' school as her weight increased following a lengthy illness. "They dismissed you because of your appearance?" Mitchell asked incredulously when she reluctantly admitted this truth. "The headmistress said I no longer presented an appropriate example of feminine refinement for the young ladies," Katherine said, the words still bitter on her tongue even years later. "The parents had complained." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "Their loss," he said firmly. "A woman's worth isn't measured by her waistline." On Friday afternoon, as Katherine was returning from purchasing thread at the mercantile, she was intercepted by a young boy carrying a message. The council requested her presence at the town hall immediately. Heart-pounding, Katherine made her way there, clutching the note in her sweating palm. Mayor Harrison and Reverend Paulson were waiting for her, their expressions unreadable. "Miss Edwards," the mayor began formally, "after careful consideration, the council has voted to offer you the position of school teacher for Jackson, beginning the first Monday of September." Relief flooded through her with such force that Katherine had to grasp the back of a chair to steady herself. "Thank you, Mayor Harrison. I accept the position and will endeavor to prove worthy of your trust." "There's a small house that comes with the position," Reverend Paulson added kindly. "Nothing grand, but it has 2 rooms and a kitchen, and it's just behind the schoolhouse." "That sounds perfect," Katherine said, already imagining a space of her own after years of boarding with others. As she left the town hall, Katherine scanned the street for Mitchell, eager to share her news. But he was nowhere to be seen. Disappointment mingled with her joy as she made her way back to the boarding house. Perhaps tomorrow, she thought. She would see him at church on Sunday if not before, but Saturday passed without any sign of Mitchell in town. Katherine busied herself with plans for the school term and began packing her few possessions in preparation for moving to the teacher's house, trying not to dwell on his absence. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Katherine dressed carefully, choosing her blue dress again and pinning a small brooch that had been her mother's to the collar. At church, she sat in what had become their pew, but as the service began, Mitchell still hadn't appeared. Katherine tried to focus on Reverend Paulson's sermon, but her eyes kept straying to the door. When the final hymn ended without Mitchell's arrival, a hollow feeling settled in her chest. Perhaps she had misread his interest. Perhaps, now that she had secured the teaching position, he felt his duty to the newcomer was complete. She was so lost in these thoughts that she almost missed Mayor Harrison's announcement before the benediction. "Before we close," the mayor said, "I'd like to introduce our new school teacher, Miss Katherine Edwards, who will be taking up her position next month. Miss Edwards, would you stand so everyone can welcome you properly?" Flushing with embarrassment but pleased, Katherine rose briefly as the congregation applauded. As she sat, she noticed several parents nodding approvingly in her direction, and even Mrs. Wilson from the cafe gave her a warm smile. After the service, Katherine found herself surrounded by town residents offering congratulations and introducing themselves as parents of her future pupils. The welcome was so different from her first Sunday that she felt slightly overwhelmed by the change. As the crowd around her thinned, Reverend Paulson approached. "Miss Edwards, before you go, I should mention that Mitchell Thorne sends his apologies for missing service today. There was trouble at the Rocking S last night. Rustlers hit one of the outlying pastures. Mitchell and the other hands are tracking them." Katherine's concern must have shown on her face, because the Reverend added quickly, "No need to worry. Mitchell's been handling such matters for years, but he asked me to convey both his apologies and his congratulations on your appointment." "Thank you, Reverend," Katherine said, relief washing through her. At least Mitchell hadn't simply disappeared without a word. "I hope they recover the stolen cattle safely." The Reverend nodded. "As do we all. The Rocking S is vital to our local economy." That afternoon, Katherine visited the teacher's house for the first time. It was small but sturdy, with a front room that would serve as both parlor and dining area, a bedroom just large enough for her bed and dresser, and a compact kitchen with a wood-burning stove. The furnishings were simple but serviceable, and a window in the bedroom looked out toward the mountains that cradled the valley. Katherine stood in that bedroom, watching the sunlight move across the distant peaks, and felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. This place could be home. This could be where she finally belonged. 3 days passed without word from Mitchell, and Katherine tried to focus on preparing for the school term rather than worrying about his safety. On Wednesday afternoon, as she was measuring the windows of the teacher's house for curtains, a knock at the door startled her from her task. When she opened the door, Mitchell stood there, hat in hand, looking tired and dusty but very much alive. "Mr. Thorne," Katherine breathed, relief making her voice unsteady. "Miss Edwards," he replied with a small smile. "I heard you got the position. Congratulations." "Thank you. The Reverend mentioned there was trouble at the ranch." Mitchell nodded, his expression darkening. "Rustlers took 20 head of cattle. We tracked them to the territory border but lost the trail. Mr. Sullivan's filing a report with the marshal in Cheyenne, but—" he shrugged, the gesture conveying the slim chances of recovery. "I'm just glad you're safe," Katherine said honestly. Mitchell's tired eyes brightened. "Are you?" "Of course," she replied, suddenly flustered by the directness of his gaze. Would you like to come in? I was just making tea." The small house felt even smaller with Mitchell's tall frame filling the doorway. He removed his hat, revealing hair matted with dust and sweat from days on the trail. "I should apologize for my appearance," he said, running a hand self-consciously through his hair. "I came straight from the ranch when I heard you'd moved into the teacher's house." "No apology needed," Katherine assured him, busying herself with the kettle. "Please sit." They talked while the water boiled, and as they sipped their tea, Mitchell describing the tracking expedition, Katherine sharing her plans for organizing the classroom and curriculum. There was an ease between them that Katherine had never experienced with anyone else, a comfort that made the silences as natural as the conversation. "The house suits you," Mitchell observed, glancing around the modest room. "You've already made it your own." Katherine smiled, pleased that he'd noticed the small touches. She'd added a vase of wildflowers on the table, her books arranged on the shelf, her mother's quilt draped over the back of a chair. "It feels like home already." "I'm glad," Mitchell said softly. Then, setting down his cup, he added, "I've been thinking a great deal while riding these past few days." "About the rustlers?" Katherine asked. "About you," Mitchell replied, his directness taking her by surprise. "About us, if I may be so bold." Katherine's heart began to race. "Us?" Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. Miss Edwards, Catherine, I know we haven't known each other long, but I find myself thinking of you at the oddest moments, wondering what you might think of a particular view from the range, or how you'd solve a problem with the ledgers, or whether you'd enjoy Mrs. Sullivan's apple cake as much as I do. Catherine sat very still, hardly daring to breathe. I realize this may seem sudden, Mitchell continued, and I would understand completely if you wish me to leave and never speak of this again. But these past days, riding with nothing but my thoughts for company, I realized that life is uncertain and sometimes brutally short. I don't want to waste time pretending I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel, Mr. Thorne? Catherine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mitchell, he corrected gently. I feel that I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Edwards. I know that must sound mad. It doesn't, Catherine interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. It doesn't sound mad at all. Mitchell's expression softened, hope replacing uncertainty in his eyes. No, no, Catherine said firmly. Because I find myself thinking of you at odd moments as well. Mitchell reached across the table and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. I'm not a wealthy man. The rocking S isn't mine, though Mr. Sullivan has hinted it might be someday. I can't offer you the comforts of Chicago. I don't want the comforts of Chicago, Catherine said. I want. She hesitated, then decided to risk the full truth. I want someone who sees me, not my size, not my flaws, but me. And you, Mitchell Thorne, from that first Sunday when you held my hand through the service, you've seen me when no one else did. Mitchell's grip on her hand tightened. I saw a beautiful, courageous woman who held her head high despite cruelty that would have broken lesser souls. I saw someone I wanted to know better. He paused, then added softly, I still do. Catherine felt tears gathering in her eyes. Even knowing that the town will talk, that they'll wonder why a man like you would choose a woman like me, Mitchell's expression hardened. Let them talk. What do they know of worth, of character, of the heart that beats beneath the surface? He rose from his chair and knelt beside hers, still holding her hand. Catherine, I'm not asking for promises today. I'm asking if you'll allow me to court you properly. To spend time together, to learn each other's hearts and minds, and to see where this feeling between us might lead. A tear slipped down Catherine's cheek. Yes, she whispered. I would like that very much. The smile that broke across Mitchell's face was like sunrise after the longest night. He raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Then that's settled, he said. And the gossips of Jackson can find something else to occupy their idle tongues. As summer faded into autumn, Mitchell courted Catherine with a thoroughness that left no doubt of his sincerity. He called at the teacher's house 3 evenings a week, bringing small gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in Cheyenne, fresh eggs from the ranch hens. On Sundays, they sat together in church, his hand finding hers during every hymn, a tradition that began with comfort but continued with affection. The school term started, and Catherine found herself embraced by the community that had once whispered behind her back. The children respected her knowledge and responded to her firm but kind teaching style. Parents praised her methods and commented on their children's progress. Even Mrs. Wilson, who had once been among the whispers, now saved a special table for Miss Edwards and Mr. Thorne on Sunday afternoons. October brought the first snow to the mountains surrounding Jackson, and with it, a letter from Mr. Sullivan to the town council. The old rancher was retiring and selling the rocking S to Mitchell, who would pay for it over time from the ranch's profits. Sullivan was moving to California to live with his sister, whose climate would be kinder to his rheumatism. That evening, Mitchell came to Catherine's house, his face alight with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. It's really happening, he said as they sat before the fire. I'll own the rocking S by Christmas." "I'm so happy for you," Katherine said sincerely. "You've earned this." Mitchell took her hand, his expression growing serious. "There's a catch. The main house needs a woman's touch. It's been bachelor quarters for too long." Katherine laughed. "I'm sure Mrs. Wilson would be happy to recommend someone to help set it to rights." "I was thinking of someone with more personal interest in the outcome," Mitchell said, his voice dropping lower. "Someone who might consider making it her home as well." Katherine's laughter faded as she realized what he was suggesting. "Mitchell." In one smooth movement, he slid from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. From his pocket, he produced a small ring with a single modest pearl set in gold. "Katherine Edwards, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I know now what I suspected that first Sunday, that you are the woman I want to share my days with, to build a life with, to love until my last breath." His voice trembled slightly. "Will you marry me and make the rocking S our home?" Tears filled Katherine's eyes as joy expanded in her chest. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Mitchell Thorne, I will marry you." Mitchell slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of all that was to come. They were married 2 weeks before Christmas in the Jackson church, where they had first met. Reverend Paulson performed the ceremony, and the building was filled to overflowing with townsfolk and ranchers from the surrounding valley. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Wilson and the ladies' auxiliary had helped her make, and Mitchell stood tall in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving his bride's face. When it came time for the vows, Mitchell's voice rang clear and strong through the church. "I, Mitchell Thorne, take you, Katherine Edwards, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Katherine repeated the same words, she thought of that first Sunday, of the whispers and cruelty, of the moment when this man had reached for her hand and held it through the service. She thought of how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. When Reverend Paulson pronounced them husband and wife, Mitchell drew her into his arms and kissed her without reservation, caring nothing for the watching crowd. The church erupted in applause, and as they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Thorne, Katherine caught sight of Mrs. Wilson dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. That night, as snow fell gently outside the windows of the Rocking S ranch house, now their home, Katherine stood in the bedroom, watching the flakes swirl in the lamplight. Mitchell came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Happy Mrs. Thorne," he murmured, pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck. Katherine turned in his embrace, looking up into the face of the man who had seen her true self from the very beginning. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said. Outside, the Wyoming winter settled over the valley, but inside the ranch house, warmth and love created a haven against the cold, a home built on the foundation of a simple, profound act of kindness in a frontier church, where a cowboy had sat beside a woman in need and held her hand.